Jake Martinez wiped sweat from his forehead as he worked on the mining equipment outside his small post on Kepler 442b. The red sun was setting behind the Rocky Mountains, and he wanted to finish the repairs before dark. The planet was mostly empty except for a few mining operations like his own. He had been working alone here for 2 years now, and had grown used to the silence. The sudden roar of engines overhead made him look up. A sleek silver ship was falling through the atmosphere. Trailing smoke and sparks, Jake dropped his tools and watched as the craft crashed into the canyon about 2 miles from his base. The impact shook the ground and sent up a cloud of dust and debris. Jake grabbed his emergency kit and jumped into his old hover truck. The vehicle bounced and rattled as he drove toward the crash site. He had seen plenty of accidents on mining worlds, but this ship looked different. It was not like the bulky human freighters or the angular alien traders he sometimes saw. When he reached the canyon, Jake parked at the edge and climbed down the rocky slope. The ship had carved a deep furrow in the ground before coming to rest against a large boulder. The hull was cracked in several places, and one of the engine pods was completely destroyed, but the basic structure seemed intact. The ship was beautiful, even damaged its smooth curves reminded Jake of flowing water, and the metal seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Strange symbols were carved along the sides, glowing faintly blue. He had never seen anything like it in his years working. The outer rim, Jake found an airlock that was partially open. He squeezed through into the ship's interior. The inside was just as elegant as the outside, with curved walls and soft lighting. Everything seemed to be made from the same shimmering metal as the hull. Controls and displays were built seamlessly into the walls without any visible buttons or switches. In the main cabin, Jake found Hershey was lying unconscious on what looked like a command chair. Her skin was pale blue, and her ears were pointed like something from an old Earth fairy tale. Long silver hair spilled over her shoulders, and she wore robes of deep purple fabric that seemed to glow softly. She was clearly not human, but she was definitely beautiful. Jake checked for signs of life. The alien woman was breathing, and her pulse seemed steady. A small device on her wrist was blinking green, which he hoped meant good things. He looked around for medical equipment, but could not understand any of the alien technology. The woman stirred and opened her eyes. They were large and violet-colored, and seemed to focus on Jake with intelligence. When she spoke, her voice was musical, but he could not understand the words. Then she touched the device on her wrist and spoke again. This time Jake could understand her. "Hello, human," she said, sitting up slowly. "I am Lyra Moonwhisper. Thank you for coming to help me." Jake stepped back and surprised the translation. Device on her wrist must have been analyzing his language. "You can understand me now?" "Yes, the device learns quickly," Lyra said. She looked around at the damaged cabin. "My ship is badly hurt. I was trying to reach the neutral zone when the engine failed." "You injured?" Jake asked, moving closer to check if she needed medical help. "Only my pride," she replied with a sad smile. "I am a good pilot, but even good pilots cannot fly with broken engines." Jake looked at the damaged systems around them. "I might be able to help. I have been fixing ships and equipment for most of my life." "What kind of power source does this thing use?" Lyra seemed surprised. "You would help me, but you do not even know who I am or where I come from." Jake shrugged. "That does not matter much. You crashed and you need help. That is enough for me." The alien woman stared at him for a long moment, as if she could not believe what she was hearing. "Where I come from, people do not help strangers without expecting something in return." "You are not where you come from anymore," Jake said. "This is human space, sort of. We help people who need it. That is just how things work." Lyra stood up carefully, testing her balance. "The ship uses crystalline energy matrices," she explained. "They channel power through quantum resonance fields, but the main crystal was shattered in the crash." Jake nodded, even though he only understood about half of what she had said. "Can you show me?" Lyra led him to an engine compartment, where a large blue crystal lay in pieces. The fragments still glowed faintly, but the light was fading. Jake examined the setup. It was completely different from human technology, but he could see how it was supposed to work. "I cannot fix the crystal itself," Jake said, "but I might be able to bypass it with some of my equipment. Give me a day or two to figure it out. 2 would really do this for a stranger. Lyra asked Jake, looked at her earnest face. Sure, why not? I have got nothing else planned this week besides your ship is. Amazing. I would love to learn how it works. Lyra smiled for the first time since he had found her. It was a beautiful smile that lit up her whole face. Thank you, Jake Martinez. You are not like anyone I have ever met that evening. Jake brought Lyra back to his outpost. She was fascinated by his simple living quarters and basic equipment. Everything was functional rather than beautiful, which seemed to intrigue her over dinner of synthesized protein and vegetables. Jake learned that Lyra was from something called the Lunar Dominion, which sounded like a huge empire spanning many star systems. She was vague about why she had been traveling alone, but Jake got the impression she was running from something. The next morning, Jake started work on her ship. He brought his portable fusion generator and various tools down to the canyon. Lyra watched everything he did, asking questions about human technology and methods. People are very practical, she observed, as Jake jury-rigged a power coupling using spare parts from his workshop. You make things work even when they are not supposed to. That is what humans do best, Jake replied. We adapt and improvise. When something breaks, we find a way to fix it, even if it is not the right way. Lyra laughed. It sounds like your people would not last long in a formal engineering review. Maybe not, but we would still be flying while everyone else was filling out paperwork, Jake said. As the day wore on, Jake found himself enjoying Lyra's company. She was intelligent and curious, and she seemed genuinely interested in learning about human culture. She told him stories about her homeworld with its crystal cities and floating gardens. It sounded like something from a dream. By evening, Jake had managed to reroute power around the damaged crystal using his own equipment. It was not pretty, but it worked. The ship's lights came back on, and the engines hummed to life. You did it? Lyra said with wonder in her voice. I cannot believe you made it. Work it is just temporary, Jake warned. The power output is only about 60% of normal, and some of your systems are still offline, but it should get you where you need to go. Lyra looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. You have given me my freedom back, Jake Martinez. How can I ever repay such a gift? Jake felt his face getting warm. You do not owe me anything. I was happy to help, but you must let me give you something, she insisted. Where I come from, debts of honor must be repaid. Jake thought about it, then pulled his grandfather's compass from his pocket. This was my grandfather's, he said. It helped guide him across Earth before humans reached the stars. Maybe it will bring you luck on your journey. Lyra accepted the compass reverently, then removed a silver ring from her finger. This has been in my family for generations, she said. Take it as a token of my gratitude. Jake took the ring. It was beautiful and obviously valuable, but you do not need to give me anything this expensive, please, Lyra said. It would honor me if you would accept it. Jake slipped the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly. Thank you. They stood there for a moment, looking at each other. Then Lyra stepped forward and kissed him softly on the lips. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed purple. Thank you for everything, Jake Martinez, she whispered. I will never forget your kindness. The next morning, Lyra prepared to leave. Jake helped her run final checks on the ship systems. Everything looked stable for the journey ahead. Hope you find what you are looking for, Jake said as they stood beside her ship. Hunt. I hope our paths cross again, Lyra replied. She touched his face gently, then climbed into her ship. Jake watched as the elegant craft lifted off and disappeared into the sky. He touched the ring on his finger and smiled. It had been an interesting week. Jake returned to his daily routine after Lyra left, but found it hard to concentrate on his work. The mining equipment seemed boring after working on alien technology, and the silence of his outpost felt more lonely than usual. He kept looking at the silver ring on his finger and thinking about her violet eyes. 3 days later, he was surprised to see a familiar ship approaching his landing pad. Lyra's craft settled down with barely a whisper, and she emerged looking much better than when he had first found her. Her robes were clean, and her silver hair was braided with small gems. Jake, she called out, as he walked toward her. I hope you do not mind that I came back. Of course not, Jake replied, though he was confused. I thought you were heading to the neutral zone. I was, she said, but I realized I had left something important behind. What was that? My curiosity about humans, she smiled. I have been thinking about our conversations, and I want to learn more about your people if you do not mind the company. Jake grinned. I would love the company. This place gets pretty quiet. Lyra had brought supplies with her, including food from her homeworld that she wanted Jake to try. The fruits tasted like nothing he had ever experienced, sweet and tart at the same time, with flavors that seemed to change as he chewed. This is amazing, Jake said, tasting a blue fruit that sparkled on his tongue. It's from the hanging gardens of my homeworld, Lyra explained. The trees grow in zero gravity and absorb starlight instead of soil nutrients. Over the following days, Lyra learned about human life on the frontier. Jake showed her how he maintained his equipment and explained the basics of human engineering. She was fascinated by how humans could make things work with limited resources. Your people waste nothing, she observed, watching Jake repair a water recycler using parts from 3 different machines. In the Dominion, we would simply replace the entire unit. That works when you have factories and supply lines, Jake said, but out here, you make do with what you have. Human engineering is about solving problems, not following manuals. Lyra tried her hand at human-style repairs under Jake's guidance. She was surprisingly good at it once she stopped worrying about proper procedures. Her long fingers were perfect for reaching into tight spaces, and her alien perspective helped her see solutions. Jake missed. You are a natural at this, Jake told her as she successfully bypassed a faulty circuit. Is liberating, she admitted. In my culture, everything has rules and traditions. Your way is much more creative. Jake learned about Lyra's world in return. The lunar dominion sounded vast and ancient, with cities that had stood for thousands of years. The elves had perfected many technologies, but they had also become set in their ways. Change came slowly, if at all. That sounds frustrating, Jake said. They were sitting outside his outpost watching the sunset. If something does not work, why not just fix it? Because that is not how things have always been done, Lyra replied. There are committees and studies and approvals needed for any changes. It can take decades to implement new ideas. No wonder you wanted to leave, Jake said. Lyra looked sad when he said that she had told him she was traveling to avoid an arranged marriage, but Jake sensed there was more to the story. He did not push her for details. On the 4th day of her visit, they were working together to upgrade Jake's communication. Hooray! When a rockslide started above them, Jake heard the rumbling first, and looked up to see tons of stone tumbling down the cliff. Face, look out, he shouted, grabbing Lyra and diving behind his hover truck. The rocks crashed down where they had been standing moments before. Dust filled the air, and smaller stones continued to rain down for several minutes. When it was quiet, Jake checked to make sure Lyra was unharmed. She was shaken but not injured. Thank you, she whispered. You saved my life. Just returning the favor, Jake said, helping her to her feet. No, Lyra said. Seriously, this was different. You risked your own safety for mine. That is the 2nd time you have put my welfare before your own. Jake did not think it was that big a deal. Anyone would have done the same, but Lyra seemed deeply moved by the incident that evening. She performed what she called a gratitude ritual. She lit candles around Jake's small living area and spoke in her own language. For several minutes the words were musical and seemed to make the air itself shimmer. When she finished, she looked at Jake with solemn eyes. In my culture, when someone saves your life twice, you are bound to them by sacred honor, she explained. We have already exchanged personal items as tokens of respect. Now I must ask for your protection and offer mine in returns. Jake did not fully understand, but he could see this was important to her. I promise to protect you as best I can, he said, and I promise the same, Lyra replied. She seemed relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. They spent the next few days exploring the area around Jake's outpost. Lyra was amazed by the raw beauty of the planet, which had never been terraformed. She had grown up among carefully designed gardens and crystal spires. The wild landscape was completely new to her. Your people are not afraid of untamed places, she said, as they stood on a cliff overlooking a vast canyon. Why should we be? Jake replied, the universe is full of wild places. If we only lived in tame ones, we would never go anywhere. That night, as they sat by a campfire, Lyra told Jake more about her past. She was not just nobility, as he had suspected. She was a princess, heir to vast wealth and power, but the weight of expectations had become unbearably wants to control my life, she said, staring into the flames. Who I marry, where I live, what I study. It is all decided by politics and tradition. I wanted to see what it would be like to make my own choices. You are making them now, Jake pointed out. Yes. She smiled, but it cannot last forever. My family will find me eventually. When they do, I will have to return to my duties. What if you just said no? Jake asked. Lyra looked at him as if he had suggested something impossible. You do not understand. The fate of entire star systems can depend on political marriages and alliances. I cannot just think of myself. Jake wanted to argue, but he could see the pain in her eyes. Instead, he reached over and took her hand. That sounds like a heavy burden to carry. It is, she said, but being here with you has shown me what freedom feels like. I will always treasure these days. Her last morning, Lyra helped Jake install some improvements to his equipment using technology from her ship. She programmed his computers to interface with galactic trade networks and upgraded his scanners to detect rare minerals. This will help you find better deposits, she explained. Your yield should increase by at least 30%. Jake was grateful, but also sad to see her preparing to leave again. I wish you could stay longer. So do I, Lyra said, but I have been away too long already. My absence will have been noticed. They stood by her ship as she prepared for departure. Jake had grown used to having her around, and the outpost would feel empty without her presence. Will I see you again? He asked. I hope so, she replied, though her voice suggested she was not certain. Lyra hugged him tightly, then kissed him again. This kiss lasted longer than the first, and Jake felt his heart racing when they separated. Take care of yourself, Jake. Martina, she whispered. You to Princess. Jake replied without thinking. Lyra stopped and stared at him. How did you know? Lucky guess. Jake said, your manners are too good for a commoner, and you know too much about politics? Lyra laughed despite her surprise. You are very observant. Does it change anything, should it? Jake asked. Lyra smiled and shook her head. No, I suppose it should not. She climbed into her ship and Jake watched it lift off into the morning sky. He touched the ring on his finger and wondered if he would ever see her again. The universe was a big place, and she had responsibilities he could barely imagine, but somehow he felt their story was not over yet. Jake tried to return to his normal routine after Lyra left for the second time, but everything felt different. The improvements she had made to his equipment worked perfectly, and his mining yields had increased just as she predicted, but the success felt hollow without her there to share it for 3 weeks. He worked alone, processing ore and maintaining his machinery. He found himself talking to her ring during quiet moments, telling it about his day and wondering what she was doing. The metal seemed to grow warmer when he spoke to it, though he knew that was probably his imagination. One morning, Jake was calibrating his scanners when alarms started blaring from his communication array. Multiple ships were approaching fast, and they were big. His basic sensors could barely track them, but they seemed to be military vessels. Jake ran outside and looked up at the sky. He could see them now, dozens of massive ships emerging from hyperspace around his planet. They were sleek and silver, like Lyra's craft, but much larger. Some of them had to be miles long. The largest one was heading directly toward his outpost. Jake considered running, but there was nowhere to go on the empty planet. Besides, the ships could probably track him anywhere he went. He decided to wait and see what they wanted. The huge ship settled down on the plain near his outpost with surprising grace for something so large. It was beautiful in the same way Lyra's ship had been, with flowing lines and that strange inner glow. A section of the hull opened and figures in ornate armor emerged. They moved with military precision, but their equipment was like nothing Jake had ever seen. The armor seemed to be made of the same shimmering metal as their ships, and it covered them completely, so he could not see their faces. Energy weapons hung at their sides, humming with barely contained power. The leader stepped forward and spoke in a musical voice that reminded Jake of Lyra. "We are here for Jake Martinez. By order of Admiral Kate Silverleaf, you will come with us immediately." Jake had been expecting this ever since he realized Lyra was royalty, but it was still scary to face an entire fleet. "I guess I do not have much choice." "That is correct," the leader replied. "You are not under arrest, but you must come with us now." Jake packed a small bag with basic supplies and followed the soldiers into their ship. The interior was just as elegant as Lyra's vessel, but much larger. He was escorted through corridors lined with guards to a luxurious cabin, where he was told to wait. The journey took several hours, during which Jake tried to process what was happening. He had always known Lyra was important, but the scale of this response suggested she was more important than he had imagined. A fleet this size could conquer small planets when they finally stopped. Jake was brought to what looked like a command center. A tall woman in elaborate armor was studying holographic displays that showed star charts and fleet positions. When she turned to face him, Jake could see the family resemblance immediately. She had the same pointed ears and pale blue skin as Lyra, but her hair was darker and her expression was stern. Her violet eyes studied Jake with obvious displeasure. "I am Admiral Kate Silverleaf," she said, "first sister to Princess Lyra, and current commander of the Lunar Fleet. You are Jake Martinez?" "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The Admiral walked around him slowly, as if examining a piece of equipment. "My sister has told me about you. She speaks very highly of your character and abilities." "That is nice to hear," Jake said, though he sensed this was not going to be a friendly conversation. However, the Admiral continued, "You have created a significant problem for our family and for the Dominion as a whole." "I do not understand," Jake said. "What problem?" The Admiral activated a holographic display that showed images of Jake and Lyra together. It must have been recorded by security systems on her ship. The final image showed them exchanging the compass, and Ring Yu performed a bonding ritual with Princess Lyra. The Admiral said, "Do you understand what that means?" "We exchanged gifts," Jake said. "I gave her my grandfather's compass, and she gave me this ring. It was just to say thank you." The Admiral looked at him as if he was incredibly naive. "Among my people, the exchange of personal items, combined with a mutual protection oath, constitutes a formal engagement contract. You are now legally betrothed to the heir of the Lunar Dominion." Jake felt like he had been hit by a transport ship. "What? That is impossible. We never talked about marriage." "Nevertheless, it happened," the Admiral said. "The ritual was recorded and witnessed by her ship's systems. The contract is binding under our law." "But we did not mean it that way," Jake protested. "It was just gratitude. Intent does not matter in matters of ancient law," the Admiral replied. "What matters is that you performed the ritual, and my sister accepted it." Jake sat down heavily in a nearby chair. This was beyond anything he had imagined. "Princess Lyra, not just princess," the Admiral said grimly. "She is heir to the Lunar Dominion, ruler of 47 star systems, and the wealthiest individual in known space. Her marriage contracts affect the balance of power across 3 galactic sectors." Jake felt sick to his stomach. No wonder she seemed so sad about arranged marriages. "I had no idea." The Admiral studied his reaction carefully. "You really did not know who she was?" "I knew she was nobility," Jake said, "but I thought maybe minor nobility, not someone who could affect entire star systems." The Admiral seemed to soften slightly. "My sister has always been too trusting. She believes people will help her without expecting anything in return. Most beings in the galaxy would kill for the opportunity you have been given." "I never wanted any opportunity," Jake said. "I just wanted to help someone who needed it. That is what my sister told me," the Admiral said. "She insists you are different from other suitors she has met. She says you helped her without knowing who she was, or what you could gain." "That is true," Jake said. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, studying the holographic displays. The problem is that Lyra's previous engagement was a crucial political alliance. The Dominion was set to marry her to Lord Darius of the Steel Confederation. It would have secured our eastern borders and opened new trade routes. What happened to that engagement? Jake asked. It was broken when Lyra fled. The Admiral said. Lord Darius was understandably upset. The Steel Confederation has threatened economic sanctions, and there are rumors they might ally with our enemies instead. Jake felt worse and worse. I never meant to cause political problems. Nevertheless, you have, the Admiral said. The question now is what to do about it. Can we just break the engagement? Jake asked. I could give back the ring and forget this ever happened. It is not that simple, the Admiral replied. Breaking an engagement requires either mutual consent or trial by combat. Given that Lyra seems quite fond of you, mutual consent is unlikely, and I assume trial by combat would not go well for me. Jake said. You would be facing trained warriors with energy weapons, the Admiral confirmed. So no, it would not go well. Jake rubbed his temples, trying to think. There has to be another solution, perhaps, the Admiral said, but first you need to meet with Lyra and the royal family. The Emperor himself wants to see the human who accidentally engaged his granddaughter. Jake looked out the viewport and saw they were approaching a massive space station. It was beautiful, beyond description, with crystal spires and gardens visible through transparent domes. Ships of every size and design moved around it in carefully coordinated patterns. Welcome to Luna Station, the Admiral said. Capital of the Lunar Dominion. Your new home if you survive the next few days. The station was even more impressive up close. Jake had never seen architecture like it. The docking bay where they landed was larger than most cities and filled with ships from across the galaxy. Everything was designed with flowing curves and organic shapes that made it feel alive. Jake was escorted through corridors lined with guards and curious nobles. Word of his arrival had clearly spread, and everyone wanted to see the human who had accidentally engaged their princess. The attention made him uncomfortable, but he tried to maintain his dignity. Finally, they reached a set of massive doors that opened into a throne room. Jake had seen pictures of royal courts in Earth history books, but nothing had prepared him for this. The chamber was vast, with walls of crystal that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. At the far end sat an ancient elf on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive gem. Princess Lyra stood beside the throne, and when she saw Jake, her face lit up with joy and relief. She started toward him, but a gesture from the Emperor made her stop. So this is the human who has turned our court upside down, the Emperor said. His voice carried clearly across the vast chamber. Despite his advanced age, approach Jake Martinez. Jake walked across the chamber, feeling like every eye in the room was on him. When he reached the throne, he was not sure whether to bow or shake hands. In the end, he settled for a respectful nod. To Your Majesty. The Emperor studied him with eyes that seemed to see everything. You are younger than I expected and less ambitious. How old are you? 28, sir, Jake replied. And what did you hope to gain by engaging my granddaughter? Nothing, Sir. Jake said. I did not know we were getting engaged. I was just trying to help. The Emperor smiled. For the first time, Lyra told me you would say that. She also told me you refused payment for repairing her ship. Is this true? Yes, sir, Jake said. She wanted to pay me, but I do not charge for helping people. Interesting. The Emperor mused. Most beings who meet Lyra see only her wealth and status. You saw a person who needed help. That is all I saw, Jake confirmed. The Emperor looked at Lyra, who nodded enthusiastically. Very well, Jake Martinez, you have created a problem, but perhaps you can also be part of the solution. We will discuss this further tomorrow. For now, you are a guest in our court. Try not to start any wars before morning. Jake was assigned quarters that were larger than his entire outpost back on Kepler 4-2b, but despite the luxury, he felt completely out of place. He was a simple mining engineer who had stumbled into galactic politics. He had no idea how to navigate this world of ancient laws and political alliances. He stood on his balcony looking out at the stars. Jake touched Lyra's ring and wondered what he had gotten himself into. Jake woke up in the most comfortable bed he had ever experienced, but sleep had not come easily. The events of the previous day felt like a strange dream, except for the silver ring on his finger that reminded him everything was real. A servant brought him breakfast and clothes that fit perfectly, despite no one taking his measurements. The garments were made from fabric that seemed to shift color in the light and felt softer than anything Jake had ever worn. They were clearly expensive, but he felt like he was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Admiral Kate arrived to escort him to his first formal meeting with the Royal Council. Jake had never been in a room with so many important people. The council chamber was filled with nobles wearing elaborate robes and jewelry worth more than entire planets. The discussions were complex and full of references to treaties and alliances that Jake did not understand. But the basic problem was clear: his accidental engagement to Lyra had upset carefully planned political arrangements. Several council members spoke about economic consequences and military threats. Lord Marcus Goldweaver, an elderly elf with calculating eyes, seemed particularly hostile. You would have us break a treaty that took decades to negotiate for the sake of a human scavenger, he said. His voice dripped with contempt. Jake wanted to defend himself, but Admiral Kate had warned him to stay quiet. During formal proceedings instead, he listened as the nobles debated his fate, as if he was not in the room. Princess Lyra spoke in his defense. Jake Martinez is not a scavenger, she said firmly. He is an engineer and a good person who helped me when I needed it most. That should count for something, Lord Goldweaver sneered. Your Highness is young and inexperienced in matters of state. Personal feelings cannot override political necessity. The debate continued for hours, with various nobles taking sides. Some saw Jake as an opportunity to strengthen ties with humanity, which was growing more influential in the galaxy. Others viewed him as a threat to elven tradition and superiority. When the session finally ended, Jake felt drained. The weight of affecting so many lives was overwhelming. He had always been a simple person who fixed things that were broken. Now he was part of something so complex he could barely understand it. That evening Lyra found him on his balcony, staring at the stars. She wore a simple dress instead of her formal robes, and looked more like the person he had met on Kepler 442 by M. Sorry about today, she said, sitting beside him. The council can be difficult when they think their interests are threatened. Jake looked at her. This is all my fault. If I had known who you were, I would have been more careful. Do not say that, Lyra replied. If you had known, you might have acted differently, and I would not have seen who you really are. Most people treat me like a prize to be won, or a tool to be used. You treated me like a person. That is what you are, Jake, said. Lyra smiled. Sadly not, according to the council. To them, I am an asset to be managed and deployed where it will do the most good. My marriage is not about my happiness. It is about securing alliances and trade agreements. That does not seem fair, Jake said. Fairness is a luxury for people who do not have entire civilizations depending on them, Lyra replied. I have always known my duty, even if I sometimes wished it was different. Over the following days, Jake learned more about court life than he ever wanted to know. Every conversation had hidden meanings, and every gesture carried political weight. He attended formal dinners where the wrong fork could cause a diplomatic incident. The other nobles watched him constantly. Some were curious about human culture, while others seemed to be looking for reasons to dismiss him. Jake tried to be respectful, but he often felt like he was walking through a minefield. Lady Sarah Moonstone, a young noblewoman who seemed friendly at first, turned out to be gathering information about human military capabilities. Lord Richard Stardust asked seemingly innocent questions about Earth trade policies. Jake realized that even casual conversations were forms of intelligence gathering. The person who surprised him most was Lyra's grandmother, Queen Luna Starweaver. She was ancient, even by elven standards, but her mind was sharp as a blade. Jake found her in the palace gardens one morning, tending to flowers that bloomed in colors he had no names for. So you are the human who has stolen my granddaughters, Heart, she said without looking up from her work. I did not mean to steal anything, Jake replied. Of course you did. Not, she said. If you had meant to, you would have failed. Lyra has always been able to see through schemes and plots. What she cannot resist is genuine kindness. Queen Luna stood and studied Jake with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. Tell me about your people, she said. What drives humans to spread across the galaxy when you could stay safely on your homeworld, Jake? Thought about the question. We explore because we want to see what is out there, he said. We want to know what we can become if we keep growing and learning. And what have you learned? That there is always more to discover, Jake said. And that most beings are basically good if you give them a chance. The Queen smiled for the first time. A diplomatic answer that might actually be true. You may survive. Court life. After all, their conversation was interrupted by alarms echoing across the station. Admiral Kate appeared, running toward the command center with several other officers. Jake and the Queen followed to see what was happening. The main display showed a massive fleet approaching the neutral zone. Ships bearing the symbols of the Void Collective were massing near the border. They were known as one of the most aggressive species in the galaxy and had been expanding their territory for decades. Lord Marcus spoke urgently to the Admiral. This is what happens when we appear weak. The Collective sees our internal disputes and decides we are vulnerable. The situation deteriorated over the next few hours. More Collective ships arrived and they began making demands for territory and resources. The Elven fleet moved to defensive positions, but they were outnumbered. Jake found himself in war councils. Despite having no military experience, the nobles debated strategy. While reports came in of collective forces attacking trade convoys and isolated colonies, during one particularly tense meeting, Jake made a suggestion that surprised everyone. What if we use guerrilla tactics instead of meeting them head-on? The Admiral looked at him skeptically. Explain. Humans fought wars on Earth for thousands of years before we reached space, Jake said. We learned that smaller forces can defeat larger ones if they use the right tactics. Hit-and-run attacks, supply line disruption, making the enemy fight on your terms instead of theirs. Several nobles scoffed at the suggestion, but Admiral Kate seemed interested. Human military history is not well known to us, she said. Tell us more. Jake found himself explaining concepts like asymmetric warfare and force multiplication. The elves had always fought formal battles with organized fleets, but the human approach was more flexible. Princess Lyra spoke up. Jake has a point. Our traditional tactics assume we are fighting other civilized species. The Collective fights like pirates and raiders, maybe. We need to think like humans, the debate continued. But Jake noticed some of the younger officers taking notes. His suggestions were not adopted immediately, but they were being considered. That was more influence than he had expected to have that night. Jake could not sleep. The weight of the situation was overwhelming. A war could cost millions of lives, and he was somehow involved in decisions that could affect the outcome. He walked the palace corridors, trying to clear his head. He found Lyra in a small chapel praying before an altar made of crystal. She looked up when he entered, and he could see tears on her cheeks. All of this is happening because of me, she said. If I had not run away from my arranged marriage, none of this would be occurring. You cannot blame yourself for the Collective attacking, Jake said. They have been planning this for years, but my actions gave them the excuse they needed. Lyra replied. Lord Darius was supposed to bring a Steel Confederation forces to help defend our borders. Now those forces might join our enemies. Instead, Jake sat beside her on the prayer bench. We will figure something out, he said. How can you be so calm? Lyra asked. Thousands of people might die because I wanted to choose my own path, because giving up now will not save anyone, Jake replied, and because I believe things work out if you keep trying to do the right thing. Lyra looked at him with wonder. You really believe that I have to, Jake said. Otherwise, what is the point of anything? The next morning brought news that changed everything. A collective advance force had attacked a civilian transport carrying refugees from the border worlds. The attack was unprovoked and brutal with no survivors. The mood in the palace shifted immediately. Even the nobles who had been focused on political maneuvering were now talking about military response. The collective had crossed a line that could not be ignored. Jake found himself called to an emergency council session. Emperor Silvermoon looked older than his years. As he addressed the assembled nobles, "We are at war," he announced. "The collective has made their intentions clear. They will not stop with our border territories. They want to destroy our way of life." Admiral Kate stood to address the council. "Our fleets are moving to defensive positions, but we are outnumbered 3-1. We need allies, and we need new strategies." Several nobles began arguing about diplomatic options and military tactics, but Jake was thinking about something else. He had seen how the collective ships moved in the tactical displays. They relied on overwhelming force and direct assault, just like he had expected. Jake stood up slowly, aware that everyone was staring at him. "Your Majesty, may I speak?" The Emperor nodded. "The collective thinks like bullies," Jake said. "They expect you to either run or meet them head on. But what if you did neither? What if you made them chase you into traps and ambushes? What if you turned their strength against them?" The chamber was quiet as Jake continued. "Humans learned a long time ago that you do not have to be stronger than your enemy. You just have to be smarter." Admiral Kate leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing?" Jake took a deep breath. "I think I know how to beat them, but it will require doing things the elven military has never done before." The Emperor smiled grimly. "Then perhaps it is time we learned some new tricks. Show us what humans know about war." Jake Martinez. Jake found himself in the strangest position of his life, giving military advice to admirals who had been fighting wars longer than humans had been in space. But the collective crisis required new thinking, and his outsider perspective was exactly what the Elven command needed. Working with Admiral Kate and her staff, Jake helped develop tactics that combined Elven technology with human strategy. Instead of meeting the collective fleets head-on, they would use hit-and-run attacks to wear down the enemy's small groups. Fast ships would strike supply lines and retreat before reinforcements could arrive. The plan required precise timing and perfect coordination. Jake spent sleepless nights in the command center watching tactical displays and suggesting modifications to the strategy. Lyra worked alongside him, coordinating with planetary defense forces and civilian evacuation efforts. Princess Lyra had surprised everyone by taking command of a mixed squadron of Elven and human volunteers. Her unconventional approach to leadership inspired crews from different species to work together in ways that had never been tried before. The first test of their new tactics came when a collective scouting force entered the Kepler system. Jake watched from the command center as Lyra's squadron engaged the enemy, using coordinated strikes that confused and overwhelmed the larger force. Instead of the formal battle lines, the collective expected the Allied ships darted in and out of combat like a swarm of angry insects. Each attack targeted specific systems, engines, weapons, and communications before disappearing into the asteroid field. The tactic worked perfectly. The collective ships were designed for overwhelming frontal assault, but they could not effectively counter multiple small threats attacking from different angles. Within hours, the entire scouting force was either destroyed or retreating. Admiral Kate looked at Jake with new respect. "Your people fight like nothing we have ever seen," she said. "It is chaotic and unpredictable, but if humans learn to be unpredictable," Jake replied. "When you are usually outnumbered, you have to be creative." The success at Kepler encouraged other systems to adopt similar tactics. Jake found himself training Elven officers in human military philosophy while learning about Elven technology capabilities. The combination was proving more powerful than either approach alone, but the real test came when the main collective fleet arrived at the trade hub of Nexus Station. The station was a critical junction for commerce throughout the sector, and losing it would cripple the galactic economy. Jake and Lyra led the defense personally aboard her upgraded flagship. The ship now carried both Elven energy, weapons, and human missile systems, creating a hybrid vessel that could fight in multiple ways. They commanded a fleet of similar hybrid ships crewed by beings from a dozen different species. The battle for Nexus Station lasted 3 days, The collective brought their most powerful warships, expecting to crush resistance through sheer firepower. But the Allied forces refused to fight the kind of battle their enemies expected. Instead of defending the station directly, the Allied fleet used it as bait. Drawing the collective ships into the station's defensive grid, they triggered a coordinated ambush. Jake had spent weeks preparing. The station's docking arms had been converted into massive weapon platforms that could target ships at close range. While the collective fleet was focused on these unexpected threats, Lyra's squadron struck from behind, using the station's bulk to mask their approach. The coordinated attack destroyed the enemy flagship and sent the rest of the fleet into retreat. Found himself standing on the bridge of Lyra's ship, watching the enemy withdraw. He could hardly believe they had won against overwhelming odds. Their improvised tactics had carried the day. You did it, Lyra said, joining him at the viewport. We actually did it. We all did it, Jake replied. This was not just human tactics or elven technology. It was everyone working together. The victory at Nexus Station marked the turning point of the war. Other systems began adopting the hybrid tactics, and the collective found themselves facing resistance. They could not overcome their advance, stalled, and eventually turned into a full retreat. But, for Jake, the end of the war meant confronting a more personal decision. His accidental engagement to Lyra had been overshadowed by the crisis, but now, the political implications were returning. The nobles were once again debating marriage contracts and alliances. Jake found himself summoned to another formal council session, but this time the atmosphere was different. The same nobles who had dismissed him as a scavenger now spoke of him with respect. His role in the victory had changed how they saw both him and humanity. Emperors Silvermoon addressed the assembled court. The war has shown us the value of new perspectives and unexpected alliances. Jake Martinez has proven himself through deed as well as character. Jake felt nervous as the Emperor continued, but the question of his engagement to Princess Lyra remains unresolved. The original marriage contract with the Steel Confederation is still broken, and our political situation requires careful consideration. Lord Marcus stood to speak. As much as it pains me to admit, Your Majesty, the human has demonstrated qualities that make him suitable for alliance. The Confederation has already indicated they would accept alternative arrangements if proper compensation is provided. Jake looked at Lyra, wondering what she was thinking. She had been quiet during the formal proceedings, but he could see tension in her posture. Princess Lyra rose to address the court with respect to the council. I believe this decision should be mine to make. I am not a prize to be awarded or a treaty to be negotiated. I am a person with the right to choose my own paths. Several nobles began to object, but Lyra continued, I have seen what my life could be if I marry for political convenience. I have also seen what it could be if I marry for love. The choice should be obvious. The Emperor held up a hand for silence. Lyra, you speak of choice, but choices have consequences. Your personal happiness must be weighed against the welfare of billions of citizens. I understand that, grandfather, Lyra replied, but I also understand that a leader who sacrifices everything personal will eventually have nothing left to give. I choose Jake Martinez not just as a husband but as a partner in building something better. Jake felt his heart racing. As all eyes turned to him, the moment felt surreal. He was being asked to choose not just a wife, but a completely different life. Jake stood slowly, aware that his next words would change everything. Your Majesty, I came here by accident. I never wanted wealth or power or political influence. I just wanted to help someone who needed. I looked at Lyra and saw her violet eyes shining with hope. But I have learned something during my time here. Princess Lyra is not just the most amazing person I have ever met. She is also someone who cares deeply about making the galaxy a better place. I would be honored to help her do that. Jake paused, then continued, formally, Your Majesty, I ask for permission to marry Princess Lyra, not because of ancient laws or political necessity, but because I love her courage, her intelligence, and her kind heart. The court was silent for a long moment, then Emperor Silvermoon smiled. Very well, he said, let it be recorded that Jake Martinez has formally requested the hand of Princess Lyra in marriage, and let it also be recorded that she has accepted. The chamber erupted in applause, and Jake felt overwhelmed by relief and joy. Lyra ran to him and threw her arms around him in a very unprincess-like display of affection. The wedding preparations took months and became a galactic event. Representatives from dozens of species attended the ceremony, which was held in the crystal gardens of Luna Station. Jake wore formal robes that made him look almost elven, while Lyra wore a gown that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. During the ceremony, Jake and Lyra exchanged new vows that incorporated both human and elven traditions. They promised to support each other in building bridges between different cultures and species. The rings they exchanged were forged from metals from both Earth and the elven homeworld. Admiral Kate performed the military honors, while Queen Luna offered the traditional blessings. Jake felt like he was living in a fairy tale, except everything was real. The reception featured food and entertainment from across the galaxy. Jake met ambassadors and dignitaries he had only heard about in news reports. Everyone wanted to congratulate the couple who had brought new hope for interspecies cooperation. But the moment Jake treasured most came late in the evening, when he and Lyra stepped onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. The party continued inside, but they had a few minutes alone together. "Do you ever regret it?" Lyra asked, "giving up your quiet life for all this complexity?" Jake looked at her beautiful face in the starlight. "Never," he said. "You showed me that there is more to life than just fixing broken things. Sometimes you get to help build something completely new." "And what are we building?" Lyra asked. "Future where beings from different worlds can work together," Jake replied, "where humans and elves and everyone else can share what makes them special instead of fighting over differences." Lyra kissed him softly. "I love you, Jake." "Martinez, I love you too," Princess Jake replied. In the months that followed, Jake and Lyra worked together to establish new programs for interspecies cooperation. They created exchange programs that allowed young beings from different worlds to learn from each other. They also established the hybrid fleet as a permanent force combining the best technologies and tactics from multiple species. Jake never stopped being amazed by that turns his life had taken. A simple act of kindness had led to romance, adventure, and a chance to help shape the future of the galaxy. He had started as a mining engineer, fixing broken equipment. Now he was helping to fix relationships between entire civilizations. On quiet evenings, when official duties were done, Jake and Lyra would return to the small workshop he had built in the palace. There, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects, they would work on simple mechanical problems. Together, it reminded them both that the most important things in life were often the simplest. The ring Jake wore now bore new inscriptions, marking his marriage and his role in the royal family, but he still carried his grandfather's compass, the one he had given to Lyra during their first meeting. She had returned it to him on their wedding day, saying it had brought them together and should stay in his family. Sometimes when Jake looked at the stars, he thought about the crash that had started everything: a broken ship, a stranded princess, and a human who believed in helping strangers in need. It seemed impossible that such small actions could lead to such large changes, but that was the thing about kindness. Jake had learned it always came back to you in ways you never expected, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, it came back as love.